Joy of the Anchorage, Alaska Memories Club.
And this is Mike. In this edition, we're looking at Anchorage street name memories, the pioneers behind the names. Have you ever wondered how a street got its name? Or who a street was named after? From around 1915, when the Alaska Railroad was being constructed, many people headed to what would become Anchorage, Alaska in search of a new life. For some, a street name has given them a permanent place in Anchorage history. A few others may have never been to Anchorage, but they were part of Alaska's history.
That's right, Mike. Let's start with the Glen Highway. If you head northeast out of Anchorage toward Palmer and Wasilla, you find yourself on a highway named after U.S. Army Captain Edwin Glenn. And one of the most scenic highways in America, the Seward Highway, takes you from Anchorage to the Kenai Peninsula. The Seward Highway was named after former Secretary of State William H. Seward, who negotiated the purchase of Alaska from Russia in 1867. At that time, Alaska was often called Seward's Folly or Seward's Icebox.
It wasn't always Northern Lights Boulevard. It was named after the famed Northern Lights, but it started with a different name. Before it became Northern Lights Boulevard, it was known as KFQD Road. At that time, the road took you to the studios of KFQD Radio, the first radio station in Anchorage and Alaska. And what about Rabbit Creek Road? The Dena'ina people gave Rabbit Creek its name, and Rabbit Creek Road is named after the creek. And how about Romick Hill? This section of Northern Lights Boulevard is sometimes called Heart Attack Hill because it's so steep and challenging when covered with snow or ice. Romick Hill is named after Dr. Joseph R. Romick, who was known as the dog team doctor, not because he was a veterinarian, but because he traveled by dog team in the Alaska interior.
What about Fireweed Lane? At one time, this street was lined with those bright red fireweed plants. And do you know about Benson Boulevard? This street honors Benny Benson, the schoolboy who designed the Alaska flag.
Mary, let's go to Bootlegger Cove Drive. In 1915, the Alaska Railroad Commission declared that liquor was banned in the area around Ship Creek that would become known as Anchorage, Alaska. Well, just around the bend and out of sight was a cove that became a popular spot for those who distilled squirrel juice, otherwise known as moonshine, to bring their banned goods to shore. The area later became known as Bootlegger's Cove.
Then there is Lake Otis Parkway. You wouldn't know it now, but back in 1919, a local turned a lake into an ice skating rink. The lake was named after him, Mr. Otis, and the parkway was named after his lake. The view of Mountain View Drive. A homesteader named Norman Lang decided to sell off part of his homestead as lots. He named his subdivision Mountain View because, well, it has a great view of the mountains. The road was given the same name.
To bar or not to bar, debar road. You are welcome to take this one with a grain of salt. In Anchorage folklore, the story goes like this. An unnamed homesteader became frustrated with Army restrictions on his property. The Army was apparently barring him from doing something. So the homesteader was reportedly heard to say, "First they bar us, then they debar us." Debar Road is possibly the result of his frustration. Or not.
In 1916, Joe and Edith Spinard came to Anchorage from Valdez. Joe even brought the first vehicle to Anchorage. Along the way, Joe turned what would become known as Spinard Lake into a resort. But to get there, he needed a road. So he convinced some local Anchorage groups to help him make a sort of road from the new area of Anchorage to his lake. The result is now called Spinard Road. The Whitneys have a road. John and Daisy Whitney first arrived at the mouth of Ship Creek in 1911 from across Cook Inlet in Knik. Whitney Road is located just below Government Hill, not far from their homestead.
And talking about homesteaders, many roads and streets in Anchorage are named after homesteaders. Muldoon and Muldoon Road. Arnold Muldoon first arrived in Anchorage in 1939. He homesteaded in an area that was way out of town at that time. That area is now known as Muldoon. He also built a road of sorts that quickly became known as Muldoon's Road. Near Muldoon Road, you'll find Turpin Street, named after Eldridge Dick Turpin, who came to Anchorage in 1937, just a couple of years ahead of Arnold Muldoon. His homestead was next to the street that now bears his name. Next up is Bregaw Street. It's named after Robert Bregaw, Jr. How about Clatt Road, named after homesteaders Lester and Dora Clatt? And DeArmond Road. This road was named after a homesteader named Harold DeArmond. And there's Abbott Road. Homesteader Cecil Abbott was honored with the naming of this road. And what about Huffman Road? As you might have guessed, this road is named after a homesteader named Vernon Huffman. And what about Boniface Parkway? You guessed it, Paul Boniface was also a homesteader.
Have you ever shopped at the Diamond Center Mall? Diamond Boulevard was named after Judge Anthony Tony Diamond. And what about O'Malley Road? This road is named after a very well thought of Anchorage doctor, James Doc O'Malley. And Dowling Road. This Anchorage road is named after a one-time Anchorage surveyor named Bud Dowling. Tudor Road, named after Burrell Tudor, who was involved with the Shugak Electric Association. Baxter Road. This road was named in honor of Dr. William Bill Baxter, a local physician, for his contributions to Anchorage.
And just who was Mary Jane Street named after? Located in the Pennington subdivision of Anchorage, this street was named after our own Mary Jane of Anchorage Memories. Well, do you know the origins of other Anchorage, Alaska roads, streets, or boulevards? This look at Anchorage roads was fascinating. I learned a lot about how our roads got their names, and it's very interesting. Until next time, Mike and Mary, the Anchorage Memories Club.